harvesting cells from an animal in order to produce meat in a laboratory, which seems to be the wave of the future. And it raises a number of halachic issues. Really, we spent most of the time last time discussing the hashkafa from Rav Kook about vegetarianism and how mankind, at some point in his evolution towards Yemos HaMashiach, will be working towards going back to a period of vegetarianism, of abstaining from sustaining himself through bloodshed, through the killing of animals. And part of that process of getting closer and closer to Yemos HaMashiach will going back to a state of where we were before the Mabul, closer to what Adam Harishon was like, who was not permitted to eat animals. But now, so that was the suggestion, is that this is really all part of this wave of the future, that as we get closer to the Geula, we're going to start changing our food chain, our food supply, to exclude the killing of animals, which is something that society and many elements within society are pushing for already. So that raised the issue, now that we have the technology to produce meat in a laboratory, harvesting cells from an animal raises a number of questions. The first question that we discussed is, could we technically harvest cells from a pig and produce pork that would be kosher? In other words, does the Torah only prohibit an animal that is born as a pig? But if I harvest cells from the pig and I gestate those cells and I cause cell division to take place in a laboratory, is that no longer pig meat that the Torah prohibits? Or because it comes from a pig, is it a pig? So one of the things that we were deliberating over is some of the poskim that had discussed the shaila of gelatin in earlier generations, in the earlier end of the 19th, beginning of 20th century, who discussed questions of gelatin that is harvested from the bones and other inedible portions of a non-kosher animal. We had discussed from Rav Aaron Kotler, who deliberated over what is the reason why the Shulchan Aruch says that that certain things that are inedible that come from a non-kosher animal are not considered to be a davar tameh, are not considered to be not kosher. One reason could be, like, we know that the inedible leather, the bones, the sinews, the horns of such an animal are not included in the prohibition of eating from a behemoth tameya. So the question is why? So Rav Aaron had discussed the two possibilities. One possibility is because these things are not edible, and as inedible objects, you're not really ingesting them properly, which means that if you could render these things into an edible state, they would still be asur. Or, tzad sheni, another tzad of looking at it, is that these things were never prohibited by the Torah in the first place. In other words, when the Torah prohibited a pig, when the Torah prohibited a behemoth tameya, it only prohibited the meat and other portions that humans would normally eat. So therefore, if I could take the bone and the horns and the skin that are normally inedible, and through some kind of processing of those items, I could render them edible, so then perhaps those things would not be non-kosher. They would be perfectly fine. As it relates to harvesting stem cells, we would have to know a little bit about the science to know technologically where do they harvest the stem cells from. They're not getting it from fully matured muscle tissue, because otherwise they won't be able to cause cell division in the laboratory. They're not getting it from embryonic cells exclusively, because then they won't be able to get it to divide into muscle tissue, or what we call meat. So they take things we call myoblasts, which are sort of in between those two, and it's not clear to me how they harvest those cells. But if they harvest those cells in some way from the part of the animal that is normally not eaten, So then it wouldn't necessarily be included in the prohibition. Another thing that
so just to understand that, if it comes from an embryonic stem cell, you can make an argument that that seems to be like a hoof or a horn or something else. But once you're getting into an immature muscle cell, I'm not sure that, I'm not understanding how that would, how you can use this shita from Avaran from Avaran Kotzar to make an extension.
I'm not sure either. I don't know that you could. I agree with you. But we also saw from Rav Yoav Yehoshua Weingarten, the Chelkas Yoav from the 19th century, that he gives now a third svara. And his svara is that normally something that's yotze min hatame is tame. Anything that emanates, any ingestible or edible item that emanates from a non-kosher animal is itself non-kosher. But what happens if this is not something that's part of the etzem of the animal, and it emits it against its will? It's not emitting it, let's say, like milk or urine or things like that. So he wants to argue, based on a precedent in the Gemara in Chulin, that if you have coagulated blood, and the blood separates between the coagulated red blood cells and the plasma, the clear liquid, the Gemara says that that clear liquid is not considered to be tameh if it comes from a behema tameya. And so he wants to argue that in the same vein, he says, it's like v'hu rak zeya ba'alma. It's davar she'enu shayach luguf habriya v'hu rak zeya ba'alma, b'zelo shayach yotze min hatameh. If something is just like stam sweat or perspiration from the animal, that's not considered to be something that's a davar hayotze min hatameh. Unlike milk and unlike urine, which are natural secretions and excretions from an animal, sweat that comes from an animal, and separated blood, you take the pure, plasma from that blood. That's not a davar hayotze min hatameh, and as a result, there's an argument that could be made that maybe this kinds of embryonic cells would not be a problem. Okay. The thing that we didn't yet discuss is the issue of Eiver min HaChai. Now, Eiver min HaChai does not apply to a behema tameya. The Gemara says, it only applies to a behema tahora. So if you wanted to obviate the problem of Eiver min HaChai, if there is such an issue of taking from a live animal, then the best way to do it would be to take pig cells and to regenerate pig cells. Again, we may have a separate problem of kol hadavar hayotze min hatamei tamei, but if we solve that, at least we don't have the problem of Eiver min HaChai. If we want beef, however, or chicken, so then we have the problem of Eiver min HaChai, potentially if we take the cells from a living animal.
Why couldn't they just check the animal first and then take it?
Well, if you take a look at source number 11, it's Reb Tzvi Reisman, who I've culled a lot of this material from. In Tchumen, he wrote as follows. He says, "Be'inyan ze na'ir ki kayom netilas hata litzorach hachanat habasar hamishubat." He says we should point out that the way that they harvest the cells in order to clone the meat, na'aseit rak mi behemot chayot, can only be done from living animals. The terem hitzlichu lahafik basar mitaim shenitlu mi behemot metot. They have not yet succeeded in harvesting cells that they can cause cell division from dead animals. Ulam ba'ofen ikroni nitan litol ta'im mi behema gam rikaim sfurim la'achar shchitata. He said, but conceptually it would be possible to harvest cells from an animal that has been freshly slaughtered, kasher hi adayin mefarperet v'hata'im mebechina biologit adayin chayim. He says, if the animal is still kicking, it's still got a nerve and its cellular function is still there, just seconds after it's been slaughtered, you could harvest the cells at that point. Im kach ya'asu ודאי שאם יעשו זאת לבהמה טהורה שנשחטה כהלכה מיד לאחר שחיטתה, ברור שטהתה לא יחשב לעבר מן החי. He says, that for sure would not be a problem. In other words, if we wanted to obviate all of these issues and go home early, right? Very simple solution. At the shlachtois, when we shech the cow or we shech the chicken, seconds later, let's harvest the cells that we need, assuming that we can do that. You know, we have the technology to be able to do that quickly while the animal is still kicking. And then we've gotten the cells from a shechted animal. There's certainly no shayla of aver min achai. It's from a behema tahora. So for sure, that would solve all of our problems if we were able to do that. I know that in gelatin manufacturing, the OU did a run of gelatin preparation from slaughtered animals. They took geshachted animals. At one time, I don't know if they still do this, but they prepared a huge amount of gelatin from slaughtered animals at one point and then sold it off to manufacturers so that they could put the OU on this. And then there was a shaila of whether it's milchix or parv. And that's something that we have to get to as well. But at least to have kosher gelatin, l'chol adeos, you could take it from a shechted animal. Okay? So let's take a look now on the sugya of aver min hachai, and we'll see why it's not so pasha. Right? You could argue, well, you're not taking a limb from an animal, are you? So is this really a potential issue of aver min hachai? So for that, I just want to point out that this is the whole question of what is encompassed in an animal when we talk about aver min hachai is not so simple. There's even a question as to why milk is not aver min hachai. It's a Gemara in Bechoros, and the Gemara says in source number 7, Amar le Rav Acha berei de Rav le Ravashi, Ela me'ata, Taima de Rabbanan mi gamal gamal, v'Rab Shimon me Esa gamal. He says, the Gemara had just gotten through a discussion of how I know that milk that comes from a camel has the same status as the camel itself, that it's tameh. Halav hachi hava amina chalav de behema tamei shari. Were it not that case, I would have inferred that milk that comes from a non-kosher animal would be permitted. But the question is, Ma'ishna mehad detanya, hatameim lesar tziron v'rot van v'kipa shelahen. So the Gemara says, why do I need a special pasuk to prohibit camel milk if I know a general principle from the word hatameim, which is extraneous in the pasuk, that teaches me that any byproduct of a non-kosher animal is non-kosher? Why do I need a special pasuk to tell me that camel milk is treif if I already have a pasuk that tells me that any byproduct of a treif animal is treif? Why would I think milk is any different? That's the Gemara's question. The Gemara's answer is, Itzterich salkadaita chamina, hol v'lekamidi da'asi mechai v'sharya rachmana, v'hai chalav ki ever min hachayhu v'shari. The answer is that I would have thought that milk is a chidush, even though I already know that any byproduct of a treifa animal is treif, but I would have thought that milk is the exception to the rule. Why? Because milk from a kosher animal is permitted. Why should it be permitted if it's aver min hachai? If it's taking a portion of the animal's body from a living animal? Milk is a portion of a living animal. By the way, you could extend that to eggs from a chicken also. It's an extension, it's something that's coming from the animal's body, and you're permitted to eat it. So Zak the Gemara, I might have thought that since the Torah permits chalav despite the fact that it's aver min hachai, I would have thought that the Torah also permits chalav that comes from a treifa animal despite the fact that it's yotzei davar yotzei min hachai as well. And therefore I need a special pasuk to tell me that it's nonetheless asa. V'hilcha chafilu b'vehema tamei lishteri kamash malan. And therefore I would have thought that milk coming from a non-kosher species of an animal, pig milk or camel milk, would be okay, and therefore I need a special pasuk to prohibit milk. And then the Gemara asks, so Taka, how do you know that milk is permitted despite the fact that it has an aspect of Eiver Min HaChai to it? And the Gemara continues, and it brings out different psukim. It tries to use Eretz Zavas Chalav Udevash, and how could the Torah extol Eretz Yisrael with something that is Eiver Min HaChai? Then the Gemara talks about Gevinos in the times of David HaMelech. The Gemara brings a number of sources, but the bottom line is that the whole cadence of the Gemara is that milk should be Eiver Min HaChai, and I need a special pasuk to tell me that it's nonetheless permitted. Now, if that's the case, then one cannot just write off the issue of harvesting stem cells and say, well, it's not the meat of the animal. Why should there even be an issue of Eiver Min HaChai? You see not that way from the Gemara. You see that even milk, if the Torah would not prohibit it, if permit it rather, it would be prohibited because of Eiver Min HaChai. Meaning that even, let's say, if I could take the hair off of a living animal and somehow convert that to food, that could potentially be a problem of Eiver Min HaChai if I don't have specifically a pasuk to permit it. And to witness that point, we have a Shulchan Aruch that says like this: Mei raglei behema v'chaya hatohorim v'chalav umechalav shelahen mutar v'hu hadin lemeimei chalav shelahen. In Yoredeya Siman Pei Aleph, we have the following halacha: the urine of a kosher animal, if you wanted to be able, we talked about urine last week from a behema tameya, but from a behema tahora, for sure it's okay. It's milk. It's mei chalav, which is its whey. In other words, when you manufacture cheese, you separate the curds and the whey. So mei chalav is the whey of the cheese production. V'hu adin lemeimei chalav shebahen. So you take the whey and you cook it and you separate it from the curds and you cook it further. You can separate out all of the milk solids and turn that into powdered whey, and then you're left with pure, clear liquid. That's what we call meimei chalav. Okay? So those are all permitted. However, v'yesh misha oser bazeh v'haminhag kisvara harishana, but there is an opinion that says that that is prohibited. Now, why in the world would a liquid derivative from milk be from whole milk? You take a liquid derivative from whole milk, why would one argue that that is prohibited? Is there any svara whatsoever to say that that should be prohibited? What is the svara to prohibit that? So it's a fascinating discussion. The Shach is of the opinion, if you take a look at the Shach on Shulchan Aruch, source number 9, he says, B'shas yalif mekra dechalav shari v'lo mitzar mishum Eiver Min HaChai. He says, the reason why milk of a kosher animal is kosher is because of the pasuk that says, despite the fact that you would think that it's Eiver Min HaChai, the Torah nevertheless permits it. V'das hasvara harishona duhu hadin lemei chalav dahainu nisyo bei dechalav v'hu adin lemeimei chalav dahainu la'achar shosin ha'gvina mevashlin hanisyo bei va'ochel tzaf lamala v'hamayim shnishalu vadan zehu meimei chalav. And so the first opinion of the Shulchan Aruch that says that whey and the liquid that is derived from whey are both permitted because they're both milk derivatives. And once the Torah permits milk, it permits all of the constituent components of milk as well. Okay, very, very logical. The afal gav de lakaman simin pei zayin kasva atur v'machaber dev ha'mevashul b'mei chalav patur v'imkein lav kechalav dami v'imkein minolan lemishrei mishum Eiver Min HaChai dehalolagolalan krada shari ela chalav. He says, what's the basis of opinion number 2 that says that meimei chalav, the liquid derived from whey, is not kosher? He says, because if the Torah only permits milk, it does not permit a derivative that is completely separated from the milk solids. And how do I know that? Because meimei chalav does not have a din of chalav vis-a-vis basar b'chalav. Meaning, if a person were able to extract the clear liquid from milk, he separated the curds in the whey, and then he further cooks the whey to get rid of all of the whey solids, and he's left with clear liquid. If he were to go ahead and cook with that and make a fleischich stew with that liquid, he would not be in violation, at least certainly not midioraisa, of basar b'chalav, because that's not chalav anymore. So if it's not, this is the question that the Shach is pointing out, if it's not chalav anymore, then you should argue it's not the ingredient that the Torah says is okay despite the fact that it's Eiver min HaChai. And therefore you're back to the prohibition of Eiver min HaChai on something that was derived from a living animal. Yes, Robert?
No, you just answered it.
Okay.
I was just thinking, because if you're going to say that the may you can use, and it's that far removed from it, so that would extend back to something that gets extracted as well, because once
so the question is, from the Gemara you see you need a pasuk in order to tell you that something extracted from a living animal is permitted, because if you don't have a pasuk, it falls back to being Eiver min HaChai. So that's the argument. The argument of the Yesh Osrim is to say that this is Eiver min HaChai, and that's why Meimei Chalav is Asur. Let me also point out that the Chassam Sofer has a fascinating shita. We don't have time to go into this tonight, but he has a shita to argue that all of the psukim that tell me that milk is permitted is only for the Jewish people. The Torah is given for Klal Yisrael. Eiver min HaChai is one of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, right? So where is the source that milk is kosher for a non-Jew? We only have a source that it's kosher for a Jew from the psukim in the Torah that address the Jewish people. Now you could argue, there's a svar in the Gemara in Chulin of mi kamidi, Dili Yisrael shari v'la'akum aser. How could you ever have such a situation that something is permissible for a Yid and prohibited for a Gentile? And but says the Chassam Sofer, the problem is that the Rambam seems to hold that there are certain substances where you do say that. It's a very long tshuva. Certainly, there's a lot of ins and outs to that whole tshuva. But lemaskana, at least in one tshuva of Chassam Sofer, he wants to argue that it could be a halachic problem for Gentiles to eat milk and eggs as well. Why is this a shaila? Because is a Jew allowed to sell milk or eggs to a Gentile? Because of the issue of lifnei iver. I can't be machshil a Gentile. I have an obligation of lifnei iver not to be machshil, not to cause a Gentile to sin. I certainly can't give it to him biyadayim if I know that it's aser.
Do they know that halacha or understand?
Okay. Anyway, the point is that it's a very interesting academic question. I don't think any poskim are choshesh for this Chassam Sofer, but it's just interesting to note. So you see how far the issue of Eiver min HaChai extends. So this is the reason, says the Shach, that the Yesh Osrim are Osrim. Even though we don't paskin that way, but the Yesh Osrim say that since you've isolated the pure clear liquid from the milk without any milk solids, this is not called milk anymore, to the point where it's not a problem of basar b'chalav. And so mehechatesi, that it's not a problem of Eiver min HaChai.
Where's the limit in the first place that Eiver min HaChai means something other than an Eiver? In other words, how do we get into the whole... That's
the hanacha of the Gemara. That you see from the whole discussion, the Gemara in Bechoros and Daf Vav, that's the Gemara's internal assumption. That anything that's Yotzei min HaChai is Eiver min HaChai. Not just an actual limb. There's two discussions in the Gemara. One is Eiver, which is a limb with a bone, and the other is Basar min HaChai. the flesh from a living animal. But you see clearly from this Gemara that even things that are excreted from the animal could potentially have a problem of Eiver Min HaChai. But listen, this is a whole controversy as to how to interpret the Gemara. The Shach says, I'm skipping a few lines in the Shach, but his maskana is, V'li nira da'afilu lo havi bichlal chalav l'chol mili lo kasha midi. Da'al korchach lo boi la'ashkuche b'shas heter chalav, ela ki hechi de lo nema da'havi kemo Eiver Min HaChai, kemo basar min HaChai. He says, the way I understand the Gemara, says the Shach, is that the Gemara is only in the Hava Amina thinking that milk is Eiver Min HaChai. Avol, lebasar de galilan kra de chalav mutar, im kein shma mina ha de kasav kra velo sochal hanefesh im habasar, shehu azhara le'Eiver Min HaChai, davka basar min HaChai, shehu gufo shel chai asur. Im kein kol shekein demei chalav shari kena. But he says, the way I'm learning the Gemara is that the pasuk that tells me that I'm allowed to drink milk is a giloi, is revealing that when the Torah prohibits products that come from a living animal, it's only prohibiting the flesh and not the other byproducts. So that's exactly how he learns the Gemara. He learns the Gemara that the pasuk is a giloi. It's actually revealing what the parameters of Eiver Min HaChai are. And the pasuk that tells me that milk is permitted is telling me that milk no longer is under the rubric of Eiver Min HaChai because it's not part of the animal's flesh or limbs. Exactly like you had suggested, Siman. But that's only the maskana of the Gemara. Zok the Shach, if so, then clearly even the separated liquid that comes from milk will certainly not have the din of Eiver Min HaChai, which is why we paskin that it's perfectly fine. Now, all of that being said, you could make the argument that according to the Shach, if we were able to isolate out some cells from a living animal, because these cells, in the way that they're harvested, is not from the actual, it's not considered to be the flesh of the animal, and that's really what we would have to deliberate over. Is a scraping from the animal tissue, is that considered to be, or harvesting, let's say, from the embryonic fluid, or the placenta of an animal, is that considered to be, that's not considered to be the basar from the chai, it's not considered to be the aver of the chai. And as long as we can ascertain that we're not actually taking the basar itself, even scraping some surface, that's microscopic, there's arguments to say that if it's not visible, it's not considered to be real basar in the halachic sense, then one could argue that it's not a problem of Eiver Min HaChai. That's the argument that some of the rabbis who are thinking about this subject want to say.
That's not going to fly with basar b'challah, because even if it's not be'en, it would still be basar.
If it's not be'en, it's still basar if it has tam. Only if it has tam. What if it has no tam?
Right.
Okay, so hold on a second. Hold on. We're going to get to basar b'chalav in just a second. The only little he'arala I would add is that Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz disagrees with the Shach. And he says that that's not the way to understand the Gemara. You, the Shach, are understanding the Gemara, that once I have a pasuk that tells me that milk is kosher, it's also that same pasuk is telling me that it's not Eiver Min HaChai. But he says, but that's not going to work. There's another Gemara that he quotes from Chulin that seems to contradict that idea. The Gemara over there talks about a behema sheyatza Eiver l'chutz. Da'asr mishum Eiver Min HaChai. The Gemara says that if an animal is in utero, and before it's fully birthed, it sticks out a limb outside of the mother, and then the halacha is that limb has the din of Eiver Min HaChai. If, let's say, the mother is slaughtered while that limb is outside of the mother's uterus, outside of the womb, the mother is slaughtered. The rest of the animal does not require slaughter because it's a ben pekua, but that one limb will be aser mishum ever min hachai. So the Gemara asks an interesting question: Ma lachush lechelbo? What about the milk from that ben pekua animal? And the Gemara says over there, what kind of question is that? Every animal that is subject to ever min hachai, its milk is kosher. And the Gemara says, Hasam yesh heter li'isuro b'shchita. The Gemara says, not necessarily. He says, this kind of animal, even if you were to shecht this ben pekua, it's still, the shchita would not alleviate the ever min hachai problem of that limb, for whatever reason. So maybe that limb contributes to the whole milk becoming ever min hachai. So you see from the Gemara over there that he says not like the Shach, that if you could create a scenario where milk could still be identified as being generated from an animal which is subject to ever min hachai, then the milk would still be ever min hachai. Anyway, without getting into too much detail, it's a machlokus, the Shach and Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz, as to whether that's the correct understanding of the Gemara. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about ever min hachai, why these cells could potentially be ever min hachai, and why potentially they would not be ever min hachai. Then we have to talk about the idea of bittul, which applies to both non-kosher species like pigs and to ever min hachai. Because if we're going to say that pig cells or cells that are harvested from a living cow are problematic, but there's another way to perhaps get around that, to say that you've accomplished bittul, because after all, those are only the starter cells. You can take 10 little cells that are microscopic in size, and like we learned last week, in 2 weeks, we have the technology to take 10 microscopic cells and to turn them into 50 tons of meat by using, by stimulating cell division and giving these cells the proper enzymes and proteins in order to divide and to grow. We provide them with algae and other and enzymes and preservatives, and there's so many different additives to these cells that will help them to divide properly. Maybe you could argue that the original cells that were harvested in a non-kosher fashion would be bottled by that point. And that's one of the arguments that Rabbi Reisman wants to make. The problem is that you have two issues. One is it's the original cells, you could argue, are no sein tam. They provide the initial flavoring. In other words, when you take a bite out of all of that cell, the cloned meat, the laboratory-produced meat, what you're tasting is the flavor from those original cells. So that's the question is of what does it mean that it's no sein tam? We know that something that's no sein tam is afilu be'elef lo batel, as we all know, those of us who have learned Hilchas Taruvos. But really the question is, what does it mean that the original cells are no sein tam? They are the catalyst for allowing other cells to divide. So there are two ways of looking at no sein tam. Is it that the original item that's not kosher, its flavor is detectable throughout this mixture, right? And if so, then you don't, that's not necessarily true. You could probably isolate the original cells, like at one place in the lab, and then all of the other cells that proliferated from that can be excised from that original microscopic core, and those are not, the flavor that you're eating is only a replication. It's only a cloning of the original cells, and you're not really tasting those pork cells that were harvested from a pig.
But defining it as a catalyst already creates a problem in and of itself.
Okay, we'll get to that in just a minute. But So therefore, the argument that it's no same tam may not be so much of an argument, depending upon how you understand the sugya of no same tam. But then you have another issue, which is called davar hamayimid, which means that even if the object its flavor is not detectable, but it is used to allow coagulation or the finishing of a product. So, for example, in the manufacturing of cheese, which is a technology that's known in the ancient world, how do you coagulate the milk in order for it to harden to become cheese? You take rennet, which is usually harvested from the stomach lining of an animal, and you add it to the milk in order to cause it to coagulate. Now, you don't taste rennet when you bite into a piece of hard cheese. All you're tasting is the cheese. But nonetheless, Chazal paskin that any davar hamayimid is not kosher. If the davar hamayimid is not kosher, then the entire cheese is not kosher. And that's the reason why cheese produced with animal rennet, even though it's bottle in size, and even though its flavor is not detectable, but because it was the ma'amid, it created the whole lattice structure of this, the solidity of this product, it is going to be asur. So therefore, the question becomes: is that what's going on when you have these pig cells or these Aver min HaChai cells? So let's take a look at source number 14. So Rabbi Reisman wants to argue as follows. He says, Lichaora, Yesh makom lomar shetei hanilkach mi behema letzarach hachanat habasar hamishubat hu davar hamayimid. One could argue that it is problematic because it's a davar hamayimid for the cloned tissue. Hamekayim is kol hata'arovis, that's giving substance to the entire mixture. Shaharei hu habasis v'hayesod l'chol tahalich hatarbut hata'im v'hachanat habasar. Because after all, it is the foundation and the basis for the cell proliferation. Ve'al kein im hata asur ba'achila hu oseret ta'arovet kula. And therefore, if the starter cells are asur ba'achila, so then that'll asur the entire mass that is produced as a result. Beram mistavir yoser she'em la hagdiris hata kedavar hamayimid. However, you could make a counter argument, he says, that maybe the original cells from the pig or from the Aver min HaChai is not a maimid. Shekein hachel bonim, hasukarim, v'hashumanim, hamechayim et hata, o matzah atzot hayam hagorim lo lihit rabot, hem davar hamaimid et tarovet, v'lo hata atzmo. He says all of the proteins, the sugars, the fats that give life to the stem cells, as well as the algae that causes it to divide and to grow, maybe those are the things that are the maimid. And the cellular material that started the cell division is only the sort of like the pattern. It's almost like providing a set of DNA ingredients or instructions to the cells. But maybe the ingredients that cause the cell division, which are other than the actual starter cells, maybe that's the maimid. I've read other poskim in subsequent issues of Tchumen that categorically reject this argument. If you have meat that is pig meat because of the original stem cells, they take it as a davar pasha, that's the davar hamayimid. So this still, the jury is out, and again, this is one of these other issues to deliberate over.
Well, I'm not sure. He makes a very good point. I mean, a davar hamayimid is by definition not the davar isser. The rennet, right? It's the catalyst. It's not the cheese. It's in and of itself. So I mean, the analogy would be everything but the meat. And that's what a catalyst is. It helps create an enzyme. Right. It has an enzyme that helps create a reaction.
Right.
It's not the meat itself.
Right.
He's here, we're trying to say.
So normally the rennet is the thing that causes the milk to harden, right?
Right.
And to turn into cheese. So here we have two different ingredients that would normally combine in the rennet. One is the stem cells that provide the molecular instructions to the cells to divide further. And then we have other things that are causing the cells to divide, that are feeding the cells in order to allow them to
Those
divide.
would be the mimid.
Both of them are the mimid.
I think those would be the mimid.
Oh, you're saying the latter would be the
Yeah,
mimid.
I'm
Okay.
not sure, because that's what the mimid is.
Okay. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it depends how you. What is the cheese? What is the making of cheese? By definition, it's the enzyme in the rennet that creates a chemical change to the milk from being a liquid to a solid. So anyway, it's not clear.
The concept of bittel, like normally it works one substance battles something else. Here it's not really, it's growth of microscopic substance. It's just magnification of the same substance. Like what battles those cells?
Well, because you're not the cells when they divide have to eat something in order to divide. They need
It's consumption.
they need something to
consume.
feed them. So it's there is some, it's like we learned when we talked about what is lab-grown meat. They put it on a lattice of or what did we call it? Not a lattice,
Scaffold.
a scaffold. They put it on a scaffold of edible material, and it grows on that edible material, and it sort of like creeps like ivy on that material. Plus, the cells themselves need some kind of fuel in order to continue that cell division process. So all of these other things that are added to this mix on a microscopic level, so he's arguing that that's what would potentially create bittul.
So it's like zev goyim.
Well, it could be zev gorim. Now, when you have zev gorim, you have two ma'amidim. One is mutter and one is usr. So then we don't say davar hamayimid is usr. So that's the argument that some want to make. Okay.
Does anybody bring up anything about the Nisr L'Chatchila?
Yes, that's also part of the essay. That won't be part of our discussion tonight because you could have a goy do it. Other ways to get around that. I just wanted to go through a very interesting tshuva from Lahoros Nasan. That's I forget who that was. That was a 20th century posek, Rav Gestetner. Thank you. Who talks about first of all, whether it's parv or fleishich, we'll have another that'll chap nafgamin also. The Mishnah in Chulin says, "Basar behema tahora b'chalav behema tahora asur levashel v'asur bahana." Right. Obviously, we know that kosher meat and kosher milk, you're not allowed to cook them, and you're not allowed to eat their mixture or benefit from their mixture. Basar behema tahora b'chalav behema tameya. Basar behema tameya b'chalav behema tahora mutar levashel mutar bahana. But you're allowed to take non-kosher meat and cook it with kosher meat and kosher milk and vice versa. So there's no isser of basar b'chalav if the original tissue, the original meat, is from a non-kosher animal. So another issue, if we're going to be matir pig meat, so then you won't have a problem of basar b'chalav. It'll be parv. Pig meat is parv, believe it or not, which is a strange concept, right? But here's the interesting shaila of Rav Gestetner. Al derech ha'she'ela b'vehema shenivra al yedei sefer yitzira u'chahad de Sanhedrin de mavri lehu egla tilsa yesh ba mishum shevisas behemta. Here's the shaila. The shaila is, the Gemara describes that Amoraim, the certain Amoraim, used to create a calf using Sefer Yetzirah, using the book of creation, Kabbalistic incantations, and whatever they did to manipulate the physical forces of nature to be able to create a calf without a mother and a father. They were able to create a calf and they would shecht it and they would eat it for Shabbos. And so he asks a very interesting shaila. Is there an obligation, if this is my calf and it grows into a cow, normally the Torah prohibits me to work an animal on Shabbos. Is such an animal under that category of shavisas behemto? Am I obligated to make sure that that animal observes Shabbos or not? So we're not going to get into that specific shaila so much tonight.
It's like a goylem
It's like a goylem counting
counting for a minion.
for a minion, right? So it says, Nira lamai demavur b'shut harim d'chol ma she'omer Torah tzarach lios kedarko shel oso davar. He says, whenever the Torah prohibits something, it has to be a normative substance. V'lochein b'Shabbos tichsiv lo sotziu ba'ina davka kederach hotzah. So therefore, when the Torah prohibits carrying, for example, or hotzah, removing something from one rishus to another rishus, it has to be in a normative fashion. If I can transfer something in a non-normative fashion by not transferring it with my hand, but with my foot or something like that, technically I have not done the malacha. V'chein ba'achila bo'inan davka derech achila ayin sham. Similarly, when the Torah prohibits eating, if I don't eat it in a normative fashion, let's say I swallow it without chewing it or whatever it is, and it's not derech achila, I haven't committed the avera. Uvesefer eglei tal kasav delo rak b'mili deshabes amrina deshelo kedarko lav klum hu mishum delo havi malachas machsheves. He says, and the eglei tal adduces from here that therefore this whole idea of something being non-normative as not being under the parameters of the prohibition doesn't just apply to Shabbos. Deha achila shelo kedarka lav achila hi v'hana shelo kedarka hana asan pater. Because we see that it applies to the rules of prohibited eating. V'hanichnas lebeis hamenuga derech achurav pater. Similarly, we know that if you walk into a house with tsaras, you become tamei. But if you walk in backwards, then you don't become tamei. Dichsiv v'haboel abayis derech bia davko v'menachos ein derech haktar bekach v'ayin od Rashi makos detar derech legalech bo aval rehitni mashches ve'in derech legalech bo. Rashi also says that if a person were to shave with a blade that is not used for shaving, he would not be in violation because it's not normative. V'ayin Rashi Shabbos the bishul b'chama shari dein derech bishul b'kach. Rashi also says that cooking something in the sun on Shabbos is not a malacha because it's not the normative way that you cook. V'ayin Rashi b'choros the rest of yodel the bein derech leida, and there, like for example, a pidyon aben. If a child is born by C-section, it's pater from pidyon aben because it's not the normative way of giving birth. Ume'atis. So all of these illustrations point out to us that when something is accomplished in a non-normative or performed in a non-normative fashion, it does not fall under the rubric of the prohibition. Ume'ata nema hu hadin bebehema shenotzur shelo kederech hateva ela b'sefer yitzira. And therefore, our argument is to say that, and if an animal was created in a non-normative fashion, not being born from a mother, but rather being created using Kabbalistic incantation, delo nemru ba dine haTorah anahugim bebehema, that the normative laws that are mentioned in regard to an animal would not necessarily apply to this kind of animal. V'leka ba mishum shavisas behemto, and therefore the law of the animal having to rest on Shabbos and not work would not necessarily apply. Ki haTorah lo dibra ela bebehemo shenoldu kederech ha'olam, because the Torah was only speaking about animals that are born in a normative fashion. Usmuchen l'svara zu yesh lahavi mimasha kasav hashloza. And I can bring a further raya from the Shalah HaKadosh in his Torah commentary to Parshas Vayeshev. Di Yosef sha'omar al hashvatim sh'achlu ever min hachai. We know that one of the things that Yosef, Chazal tell us, that Vayaveh Yosef es di basam ra'a el avihem. Yosef brought the evil tidings of his brothers to their father Yaakov. And one of the things that Yosef complained that he witnessed the brothers doing is that they were eating Ever Min HaChai. So the Shalah says, Chas v'shalom, that the brothers would be eating Ever Min HaChai. What were they really doing? What were they really doing? Hainu sha'asu hashavatim behema yidei sefer yitzira b'tzir v'shemos. He says they created animals that appeared to be living using the sefer yitzira, using mystical incantations. Ubavadai zeh hanivra al yidei shemos v'lo mitzad hatolada ein tzarich shchita v'nitar la'ochlo ba'odo chai. Such an animal doesn't require shchita. It's kosher to eat it even when it's still alive. The Yosef lo yada v'haya savur shehu nolad me'av ve'em. Ve'al kein hevi dibazu la'aviv shehem ochlim ever min achai. Yosef failed to realize this. He thought that they were eating from a living animal that was born normatively, and therefore he complained and brought the tidings to their father. Uve'emes heim kedin asu ayin sham. And by the way, lest you think that this shalah is purely agadata, this is brought in halacha sfarim as well. V'lichora me'ayin haregalim lomar b'pshitus de behema shenivra they say for yitzira ein badin shchita. Where does the shalah get this from? That just because the animal was created in a non-normative fashion from the Sefer Yetzirah, that it doesn't require shchita. B'shem adina kishar behema satun in shchita. Maybe such an animal also needs to be shechted. Ve'al karchach depshita lahashla zal didine hatorah lo nemru ele b'kedarka v'chafi darko shel shut harim hanal ve'al kein behema shenotza yidei Sefer Yetzirah shein zu derech Yetziras behema. Lo nemru ba dine hator mi behema kazulo dibra hator mi meila gam dine shavisas behem telo shayach ba. He says the shalah took it as a davar pashut, as quite self-evident, that if an animal comes into existence in a non-normative fashion, it is not the animal that the Torah addresses in all of the laws that give us parameters as how we're supposed to deal with these animals in our lives, halachically. The Torah only requires shchita for an animal that's a normal animal that's born from a mother and a father. But if an animal is not born from a mother and a father, those laws of shchita don't apply.
How far would you extend it?
Vinira, degam din basar b'chalav lekaba. Seems to me, he says, that there's the laws of meat and milk also don't apply. Kiven da haTorah omer lo sefashel gedi b'chalei vimo. Since the Torah says, do not cook a kid in its mother's milk, v'dibra rak mima shenotzar kederach hateva v'lo migedi shenotzar al yedei sefer Yetzirah. This does not apply to an animal that is created from Sefer Yetzirah. And v'ayin shut chasam sofer shadan im ika isra basa b'chalav shel bas bekua mishum dahavi chalav shchuta ayin sham. The chasam sofer deliberates it, perhaps even the milk from a ben pekua, that animal that was in utero when its mother was shechted. Maybe that animal does not, its milk, if it's a female, does not have a din of basar b'chalav, because maybe the din of basar b'chalav only applies to an animal which is subject to shchita, not this animal. And he brings other examples of this. And so the bottom line is that he wants to argue that it would not have a din of basar b'chalav. And if that's the case, then any meat that is produced in a non-normative fashion would also, the argument could be made that it doesn't have a din of basar vis-a-vis chalav, and therefore would be considered to be truly parv. Now, that's something that requires a lot of thought. One could say that there's a maris ayin factor. One could certainly say that if it has the same cellular structure as meat, Chazal would come in and be gozer that you can't eat it with milk because it's easily confused with other kinds of meat. But we may reach a stage in society where the majority of meat that's available commercially will be lab-produced meat, because we'll no longer be killing animals for our food supply. So that could have become obsolete as well, the whole din of basar b'chalav. These are all things that are worth considering, and as I mentioned at the beginning, they are all a reflection to the fact that we are getting closer to the Geula. And I'll hold it here for tonight.